The world had always seemed unfair to Charles. At just 9 years old, he understood loss and hardship better than most his age. His mother's death had left an emptiness that his father, Andrew, tried valiantly to fill, though grief had etched its mark deeply into their small family. Each day was a struggle, though they never spoke of it. Instead, they focused on small joys, a new book from the library, the occasional treat of pizza after school, or simply sitting together at the dinner table, even if the meals were often meager. It was a cool autumn morning when Charles boarded the bus to school. His father, Andrew, stood by the door, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. Andrew had been out of work for months, sending out resume after resume while working odd jobs to keep food on the table and his son in school. The two had a quiet understanding between them. There wasn't always enough, but they had each other. That day on the bus, Charles watched the passengers file in, his thoughts lost in the rhythm of the city passing by outside. It was then that the incident unfolded, one that would unknowingly alter the course of his life. A woman boarded the bus, her clothes worn and face lined with worry. She paused before the driver, her hands trembling as she fumbled in her pockets. The bus fell silent as the driver's voice boomed through the air. "What do you mean you don't have the fare?" The driver snapped, his tone sharp and dismissive. The woman's face flushed, her eyes darting around for help, but the other passengers averted their gaze. No one was willing to intervene. Charles, seated near the back, felt his heart race. He wasn't sure why, but the cruelty of the driver's words stung him. Perhaps it reminded him of the times his father had been scorned for being a few cents short or when they had to walk home because they couldn't afford the fare. Without thinking, Charles stood up. His small hand gripped the edge of his seat for support as he made his way to the front of the bus. His voice, though young, carried a weight beyond his years. "Here," he said, thrusting his lunch money into the driver's hand. "She can ride." The driver stared down at him, momentarily speechless. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, murmuring in quiet surprise. Charles returned to his seat, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of whether he had done something brave or foolish. The woman, her eyes wide with disbelief, sank into the seat next to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know how to repay you." Charles shrugged, offering a small smile. "You don't need to." It was just the right thing to do. Little did he know, this simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that neither he nor his father could ever have imagined. The next day, the school was abuzz with rumors. A luxury black Mercedes had pulled up in front of the modest school gates, gleaming in the mid-morning sunlight. The car was out of place, a beacon of wealth in a neighborhood that rarely saw such things. Inside the car sat a woman, her gaze scanning the grounds until it landed on the boy she had come to find, Charles. Charles was completely unaware of the stir he had caused. His thoughts were on his empty stomach, the lunch money he had given away the previous day now sorely missed. His father had promised him pizza after school to make up for it, but the ache of hunger gnawed at him nonetheless. As the bell rang for lunch, Charles gathered his things and headed toward the cafeteria when a voice called his name. "Charles." He turned, startled, to see the woman from the bus standing near the principal's office. But she looked different today, her face no longer etched with fear, her clothes neat and elegant. She beckoned him over, her eyes filled with warmth and gratitude. "I needed to see you," she began, her voice softer now, more composed. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you did for me yesterday." Charles shrugged, a little embarrassed by the attention. "It wasn't a big deal." "But it was," she insisted. "You didn't know me. You didn't know my situation, and yet you helped me when no one else would. That kind of kindness. It's rare." The woman introduced herself as Catherine Ross. What Charles didn't know, and what would soon send ripples through his and his father's life, was that Catherine wasn't just any woman. She was the daughter of August Ross, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city, a magnate whose luxury car empire stretched across the country. "I've been thinking about how to repay you," she continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to help you and your father." Charles's brows furrowed in confusion. "You don't need to do that." Catherine smiled. But I want to. I can't explain everything now, but I've spoken to your school. I'm going to take care of your education. Charles's world shifted beneath him. Her words, so unexpected, left him speechless. Before he could respond, Catherine gently placed a hand on his shoulder. You have no idea how much you've changed my life, Charles, she whispered. But soon, you'll understand. Andrew sat across from Catherine in a quiet cafe downtown, his hands clasped nervously around his coffee cup. He still couldn't believe the events of the past few days. After years of struggling to keep afloat, of watching his son go without and feeling powerless to change their situation, it seemed like their fortune had shifted overnight. You don't have to do this, Andrew said, his voice low but steady. We've managed this long without help. Catherine looked at him, her expression thoughtful. I know it's hard to accept charity, Andrew. But this isn't charity. I owe you and your son more than you know. Andrew raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. He had heard Charles's story about the bus, how he had helped a woman in need, but nothing in the story suggested Catherine's deep gratitude went beyond the simple act of kindness. There's something I need to tell you, Catherine said, her eyes dropping to the table. Something I've never told anyone. Andrew leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. That day on the bus, Catherine began, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't just a woman down on her luck. I was running. I was running for my life. Andrew's eyes widened, his heart pounding in his chest. The gravity in her voice told him this was no ordinary confession. I had been kidnapped, she continued, her voice trembling. They took me in the early hours of the morning, but I managed to escape. I had no money, no phone, and I was terrified they would find me again. That bus was my only hope of getting to safety. Andrew sat back, stunned. Kidnapped? By who? Catherine hesitated. I don't know exactly who. All I know is they wanted my father's money, and they were willing to do anything to get it. The weight of her words settled over them like a cloud. Andrew could feel the danger she had been in, the fear that still clung to her. And yet, here she was, offering them help. He could see now why she was so determined to repay their kindness. Charles hadn't just helped her, he had unknowingly saved her life. As weeks passed, Catherine became a frequent presence in Charles and Andrew's lives. She visited often, bringing with her a sense of warmth and light that had been absent for so long. Charles adored her, and Andrew found himself drawn to her kindness, her strength, and the unspoken bond they had formed over her secret. Despite the growing closeness between them, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The kidnapping, the secrecy surrounding her family, it all felt too perfect, too orchestrated. Yet whenever he pressed for more information, Catherine would skillfully divert the conversation, leaving him with more questions than answers. One evening, after a shared dinner at their small apartment, Catherine opened up a little more. As the conversation drifted toward family, Catherine's smile faded. My father, she began, her voice tinged with sadness, he's not the man people think he is. Andrew frowned. What do you mean? He's powerful, yes. Respected in the business world. But behind closed doors. He's ruthless. He has enemies. A lot of them. She paused, her gaze distant as if recalling a painful memory. That's why I was taken. It wasn't just about money, it was revenge. Andrew's breath caught in his throat. Andrew felt a chill creep down his spine at Catherine's words. Revenge. The world of luxury and power that she came from, the one that had seemed like a fairy tale just days ago, now felt dangerous, like an intricate web of lies and deceit, one they were gradually being drawn into. Catherine, Andrew began, his voice soft but insistent, you're talking about something bigger than just a kidnapping for ransom. Why haven't you gone to the police? Catherine sighed, her fingers tightening around the glass of wine in front of her. I tried. But my father. He has influence. When I was taken, he didn't want the story to get out. He thought it would make him look weak, vulnerable to his enemies. I begged him to involve the police, to find out who was behind it, but he silenced me. Andrew's jaw clenched. He could see the pain in her eyes, the frustration of being trapped in a world where money and power meant everything, except safety and truth. He wanted to ask more, to probe into the mysteries she had only begun to reveal, but something in her posture told him this was all she could share for now. "I understand," he said quietly. "But you're safe now. Whatever you need, Charles and I are here for you." Catherine looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. For a moment, she reached out and squeezed his hand, a small but intimate gesture that sent a surge of warmth through him. It was strange to think how quickly their lives had intertwined, how a single act of kindness had forged this connection between them. But Andrew couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his chest. He wasn't just concerned about Catherine's safety, he was starting to feel something deeper for her, something that frightened him almost as much as her past. The weeks rolled on, and life took on a strange new rhythm. Charles, now thriving at school with the support Catherine had arranged, felt like he was living a dream. He spent afternoons with Catherine, who treated him like family, and even weekends at her estate, an opulent mansion nestled in the quiet, wealthy outskirts of the city. Andrew, too, found himself spending more time with Catherine, both for practical reasons, discussing Charles's future and her father's company, but also for more personal ones. Their shared moments, once tentative, had grown deeper, filled with laughter, shared silences, and a subtle, unspoken understanding. But Catherine's past refused to stay buried. It started with small things. Andrew noticed the car parked across from his apartment more than once, a sleek, black sedan that never seemed to belong to anyone in the neighborhood. And then there were the phone calls, late at night, with no one on the other end. At first, he brushed them off as coincidence, but the uneasy feeling that someone was watching them became impossible to shake. One night, as he walked home after work, Andrew saw the car again. This time, it was parked a few blocks down, its engine running quietly. He felt a cold prickle at the back of his neck. Without thinking, he changed direction, walking past his building and doubling back through an alley, hoping to catch a glimpse of the driver. But by the time he returned, the car was gone. When he finally entered the apartment, he found Catherine waiting for him at the kitchen table. Her expression was strained, her hands gripping a letter tightly. "Catherine, what's wrong?" Andrew asked, his concern deepening at the sight of her. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with worry. "I didn't want to tell you, but I think they've found me again." Andrew's heart sank. "The people who kidnapped you?" She nodded. "I received this letter today. No return address. But it's a warning, Andrew. They know where I am." He crossed the room quickly, taking the letter from her trembling hands. It was brief, the words cut out from magazines and newspapers like something from a crime novel. "You can't hide forever. We'll finish what we started." Andrew's chest tightened. His protective instincts surged as he pulled Catherine into his arms. "We'll figure this out. We'll go to the police. No one's going to hurt you." But Catherine shook her head against his chest. "You don't understand. If we go to the police, it'll start a war. My father has too many enemies, too many people who want him destroyed. I'm caught in the middle." Andrew felt helpless. He had never been involved in anything like this: kidnappings, threats, the underbelly of a world he had never even known existed. But Catherine was, and now, so was Charles. The stakes had risen far beyond what any of them had anticipated. The morning sun filtered through the window as Andrew sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter in front of him. Beside him, Charles hummed quietly while munching on his cereal, oblivious to the dark cloud that had settled over their lives. Andrew's mind raced, trying to figure out the next step. They were in over their heads, and it was only a matter of time before the shadowy threat made itself known. He looked at the clock. Catherine was late. She had been staying with them for the past few days, lying low after receiving the letter, but this morning, she had left early for an errand. Something about the situation gnawed at him. Then his phone buzzed on the table, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the docks. Come alone. I have information on Catherine." Andrew's blood ran cold. He stood abruptly, startling Charles. "I'll be back soon, buddy," he muttered, grabbing his coat. "Stay here, okay? Don't open the door for anyone." Charles looked up, concern flickering in his eyes, but he nodded. "Okay, Dad." Andrew's heart pounded in his chest as he drove to the docks, the words from the text repeating in his mind. Could this be a trap? Or was there something about Catherine that he didn't know? He didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it, but the uncertainty was eating away at him. As he approached the deserted docks, a figure stepped out from behind a row of shipping containers. Andrew's breath caught as he recognized the man, Philip, one of Catherine's father's most trusted advisors. His expression was dark, his suit rumpled as if he had been hiding out for days. "What's going on, Philip?" Andrew demanded, stepping forward. "Why are you sending me messages like this?" Philip glanced around nervously before speaking in a low, hurried voice. "You need to know the truth, Andrew. Catherine's been lying to you." Andrew's heart thudded painfully in his chest. "What do you mean? She wasn't just a victim in this kidnapping. She orchestrated it." Andrew recoiled, his mind racing. "What? That doesn't make sense. Why would she?" Philip cut him off. "To destroy her father. She's been plotting this for years. The enemies, the threats, they're real, but Catherine's pulling the strings. She wants her father's empire to collapse so she can take control." Andrew's world spun. Could this really be true? Catherine, the woman who had brought light into his and Charles's lives, who had saved them, was she capable of such treachery? Everything in him wanted to deny it, but Philip's eyes held the truth that he couldn't ignore. "Why are you telling me this?" Andrew asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Philip's expression hardened. "Because you're in danger. If you don't leave now, she'll take you down with her." Andrew raced home, his mind swirling with Philip's revelation. He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept that Catherine could have deceived him so completely, but he knew he couldn't ignore the possibility. He had to confront her. When he arrived back at the apartment, Catherine was there, standing by the window, her face pale and drawn. She turned as he entered, and the look in her eyes told him everything. "You talked to Philip," she said quietly. Andrew's throat tightened. "Is it true?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly. "Yes." Andrew felt the ground shift beneath him. "Why, Catherine? Why lie to us? Why use us?" She stepped toward him, desperation in her voice. "I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant for you or Charles to get caught up in this. But I had no choice. My father. He's a monster, Andrew. You have no idea what he's done. I had to stop him." Andrew's heart ached. He had believed in her, trusted her, and now he didn't know what to think. "You should have told me the truth." "I couldn't," she cried, her voice breaking. "I couldn't risk losing you. I didn't know how to tell you that the man you trusted with your son's future was the same man who ordered people to kill, to destroy lives." Andrew shook his head, his heart heavy with betrayal. But as he looked at her, he saw the woman who had helped his son, who had been there for them when no one else was. She had her reasons, however twisted they might have been. And now, he had a choice to make. "Come with me," Catherine whispered, her eyes pleading. "We can leave. We can start over." Andrew's mind whirled. Could he forgive her? Could he trust her again? He thought of Charles, the life they had built, the future that lay ahead. And despite everything, he knew the answer. "No," Andrew said softly, his voice filled with resolve. "We can't run from this." Catherine's face crumpled with despair, but Andrew stepped closer, taking her hand. "We face this together. But no more lies, Catherine. No more secrets." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "I promise." And in that moment, despite the darkness surrounding them, Andrew knew they had a chance at redemption, a chance to rebuild their lives, free from the shadows of the past. Because sometimes, even the deepest betrayals could lead to forgiveness. And sometimes, the hardest truths could lead to new beginnings. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.